She told me, "If you can't afford it, don't come," then laughed, and reminded me I once borrowed money for a car repair, in front of 2 other relatives. I hadn't even asked to come. She called me just to humiliate me. I hung up, hands shaking, and that's when my phone buzzed. A text from Uncle David. "Call me. There's something you need to know about your father's estate." That was the moment I stopped crying and started digging. I may not have $1,500, but I do have every document my father ever filed. And something in that stack, it's going to bury her. My name is Erin Carver, and I'm 45 years old. I live alone in a modest bungalow where I keep everything organized, just like my father Marcus taught me. The old fridge hums in my kitchen, a steady companion to my evening routines of sorting through papers at my tidy desk. My late father Marcus made our family reunions sacred. The charcoal smoke, citrus marinades, and laughter floating across summer evenings. My Aunt Lorraine, my father's only sister, now presides over these gatherings with her glossy perfection and razor-sharp comments that slice through holiday joy. But what she doesn't know is that I have every program, every email, every instruction my father Marcus left behind, all filed in labeled envelopes. He always said paper outlives lies. Times are drawing close to another reunion, and Aunt Lorraine's voice grows louder than my memories. But let me start from the beginning. I'd been dreading Aunt Lorraine's call about the Florida reunion for weeks. When my phone finally lit up with her number, I was sitting at my desk, thumbing through Dad's old reunion programs. You know that feeling when you're about to step into something unpleasant? Like watching storm clouds roll in while you're still hanging laundry. "Erin, darling," she drawled, her voice dripping with that sugary condescension she'd perfected over the years. "We're having the reunion at the Palmetto Resort in Tampa this year. Absolutely gorgeous property, right on the water." I closed my eyes, imagining the salt breeze and palm trees. For a moment, I could almost smell the ocean mixing with memories of Dad's famous grilled grouper. The fantasy was nice while it lasted. "Now, about the arrangements," she continued, ice cubes clinking in what I assumed was her usual afternoon gin and tonic. "Flights are running $1,500 per person." She paused, letting that number hang in the air like smoke. "If you can't afford it, don't come. We wouldn't want you stretching yourself too thin." My throat tightened. The way she said it, casual, dismissive, made my cheeks burn. Remember how Dad used to say reunions were about bringing people together, not pushing them apart? His words echoed in my head as I sat there, staring at the sun-bleached program on my desk from the last reunion he'd attended. I'll have to check my budget," I managed to say, hating how small my voice sounded. Well, do let me know soon. The resort needs final numbers." More ice clinked. "Ta-ta, darling." The line went dead before I could respond. I set my phone down, feeling heat build behind my eyes. $1,500. She might as well have asked for the moon. The program on my desk seemed to mock me, its edges worn soft from handling, Dad's neat handwriting still visible in the margins where he'd made notes about seating arrangements and activities. He'd always made sure everyone could come, somehow. You ever notice how silence gets heavier when you're trying not to cry? The tick of my living room clock seemed to grow louder with each second, marking time in a house that suddenly felt too empty, too quiet. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Uncle David lit up the screen. "Call me. There's something you need to know about your father's estate." My stomach dropped. Dad's estate? That had been settled years ago, right after he passed. I stared at those words until they blurred, my thumb hovering over Uncle David's number. What could he possibly need to tell me now? The clock kept ticking as I finally pressed call, each ring seeming to stretch longer than the last. My free hand found Dad's old program, fingers tracing the faded lettering while I waited for Uncle David to answer. Whatever truth he had to share, I knew it would change everything about Aunt Lorraine's polished narrative. "Hey, kiddo," Uncle David's familiar voice came through, warm but weighted with something I couldn't quite name. "You got a minute? We need to talk about Marcus. about what he really left behind. I glanced at the clock, 6:45 p.m., and settled deeper into my chair. I'm not going anywhere, Uncle David. Tell me everything. The next morning, I pulled into Jerry's diner at 7:30 sharp. You know those old-school places where the coffee's always fresh and the waitresses know half the customers by name? That was Jerry's. I spotted Uncle David in our usual booth, the one Dad always picked, because it caught the morning sun just right. Been a while since we did breakfast, I said, sliding into the cracked vinyl seat across from him. The familiar smell of coffee and sizzling bacon wrapped around me like a warm blanket. Uncle David looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from carrying something heavy. He waited until Martha, our regular waitress, poured us both coffee and took our orders, before leaning forward. Your father, he started, then paused to stir sugar into his cup. Marcus was always thinking ahead, you know that? I nodded, remembering Dad's meticulously labeled filing cabinets. He kept everything organized, including his legacy. Uncle David reached down and pulled out a worn leather briefcase. What I'm about to tell you, well, it should have come out years ago, but Lorraine, he shook his head. She has a way of controlling information. My stomach tightened. Ever have that moment when you just know everything's about to shift? That's how it felt, watching Uncle David pull out a manila folder. Your father set up a trust, he said quietly. Called it the Family Legacy Events Fund. It was specifically for reunions, travel costs, lodging, everything. The whole point was to make sure money would never keep anyone from attending. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I thought about Aunt Lorraine's dismissive tone, her casual mention of $1,500 for flights. My coffee cup clattered slightly as I set it down. How much? I managed to ask. Originally? Close to $500,000. Uncle David spread out some papers. Marcus knew reunions would get more expensive as the family grew, as people moved further apart. He wanted to remove money as a barrier completely. And Lorraine's been managing this? My voice came out sharper than I intended. He nodded grimly. She convinced everyone she was the most qualified. But look at these withdrawals. He slid over a bank statement. 20,000 here, 30,000 there. None of it matching any reunion expenses I can find. I stared at the numbers until they blurred. My hands were shaking, and not from the coffee. She told me I couldn't come if I couldn't afford the flights. Exactly. Uncle David's face darkened. That's the opposite of what Marcus wanted. The trust was meant to prevent exactly that kind of gatekeeping. Martha appeared with our breakfast plates, but the smell of warm pancakes that usually made my mouth water now turned my stomach. As soon as she left, I leaned forward. I need copies of everything, I said. Every document, every statement, anything that shows what Dad actually intended. I'll scan what I can tonight. He patted the folder. These are mostly old papers from when I helped Marcus set it up. Lorraine has the current records, but he trailed off meaningfully. But she's not likely to share them willingly, I finished. The diner's cheerful clatter seemed to fade into background noise as I processed everything. We finished our breakfast, mostly in silence. Before leaving, Uncle David handed me the folder of his notes. Be careful how you handle this, kiddo. Lorraine's got most of the family thinking she's some kind of financial genius. Back home, I spread everything across my desk. Dad's old reunion programs on one side, Uncle David's revelations on the other. The contrast was stark. Dad's careful planning versus Aunt Lorraine's manipulation. I spent the rest of the day drafting and redrafting what I'd say to her, trying to find the right words that would cut through her defenses without giving her room to twist things around. By evening, I had my script ready, each point carefully backed by the documents in front of me. I picked up my phone, Dad's last reunion program held tight in my other hand like a talisman. Time to make that call. I stared at my phone for a long moment, Dad's reunion program still clutched in my other hand. The house felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath. You know that feeling when you're about to step off a diving board? That's how my stomach felt as I dialed Aunt Lorraine's number. She answered on the third ring. Hello, darling. Her voice dripped honey, but I could hear the ice cubes tinkling in what was probably her evening scotch. "Aunt Lorraine," I said, keeping my voice steady. "We need to talk about Dad's trust fund for the reunions." There was a pause, just long enough for me to hear her set down her glass. "Oh? And what exactly do you think you know about that?" "I know Dad set it up specifically so everyone could attend, regardless of their financial situation. The flights, the lodging, it's all supposed to be covered." I glanced down at Uncle David's notes spread across my desk. A laugh tinkled through the phone, sweet as wind chimes and just as hollow. "My dear, is this about the Florida trip? Are you still upset about that?" "This isn't about being upset. It's about Dad's wishes and how the trust—" "Listen to me very carefully." The honey in her voice crystallized into something sharp. "You've always been jealous of those who manage their money better than you. Always looking for handouts, aren't you? Just like when you needed help with that car payment last year." My face burned. I'd borrowed money once, after a medical emergency drained my savings, and I'd paid it back within 3 months. "This isn't about me," I said. "The trust fund is practically exhausted thanks to inflation." She cut in smoothly. "Perhaps if you understood anything about finance, you'd realize how costs have skyrocketed. But then, you've never had to manage real money, have you?" I held the phone away from my ear as she continued, her voice rising. "And now you're trying to stir up chaos in the family? Over money? Your father would be so disappointed." That last bit stung like a slap. I looked at Dad's program, at his neat handwriting in the margins. Family above all. "If you're so concerned about chaos," I said, "why not just show me the trust's records? I don't have to justify myself to someone who can't even afford a plane ticket." The ice in her glass clinked again. "Be careful, dear. Keep pushing this, and you might find yourself very lonely at the next gathering. If you can make it, that is." I hung up. My hands were shaking so hard I had to set the phone down. Within minutes, I drafted an email to my cousins, trying to explain about the trust without sounding accusatory. Their responses trickled in over the next hour. "Sorry you're struggling with money. Aunt Lorraine's always been good with finances. Maybe you should focus on saving up instead of causing drama." My phone buzzed. Again, Uncle David this time. "Kid," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We've got a problem. The Florida reunion? It's in 3 weeks. So, according to the trust documents, Lorraine's annual control gets automatically renewed unless someone proves mismanagement before the next family event. After that, she's locked in for another year." I felt the blood drain from my face. 3 weeks to find proof? That's all we've got. After we hung up, I pulled out my calendar and circled the reunion date in red marker. 3 weeks. 21 days to uncover what Aunt Lorraine had spent years hiding. The clock on my desk ticked past midnight as I sat there, surrounded by papers and betrayal. The house creaked and settled around me, but I stayed put, staring at that red circle until my vision blurred. "Not this time," I whispered to the quiet room. "This won't be another year of silence." The next morning, I sat at my computer with a fresh cup of coffee, ready to dig into the trust's records. You'd think in this digital age, finding financial documents would be easy, right? Wrong. First stop was the bank's website. "Account access temporarily unavailable," the screen mocked. I tried the backup portal, password protected, naturally. Called the branch where Dad had opened the trust, but they couldn't help without Aunt Lorraine's authorization. I rubbed my temples, remembering how Dad used to say, "Paper trails never lie, honey." But this trail was buried deep. The vendors came next. I pulled up last year's reunion details and started calling. The hotel's accounting department put me on hold for 45 minutes before disconnecting. The catering company had been bought out. The rental service didn't keep records past 6 months. Around noon, my stomach growling, I found a records retrieval service online. Their website looked promising, specializing in trust and estate documentation. I filled out their form, fingers crossed. Their estimate arrived within the hour, $2,800 for a rush job. I opened my banking app and stared at my balance. $342.33. The mortgage was due next week. My throat tightened as I closed the tab. The afternoon dissolved into a blur of emails. I created a spreadsheet of every reunion, venue for the past 5 years, and contacted each one. You know that hollow feeling when you're shouting into the void? Yeah, that was me, watching automated responses fill my inbox. Records archived. Data retention period expired. Please contact event coordinator. By twilight, my eyes were burning from the screen glare. That's when Uncle David's truck rumbled into my driveway. He appeared at my door, clutching a battered accordion folder, its edges soft and frayed like an old paperback. "Found these in my garage," he said, following me to the kitchen table. "Been holding on to them since your dad passed." My hands trembled as we spread the bank statements across the wooden surface. The paper felt thin, delicate, like something that could dissolve if I looked too hard. But the numbers, those were solid enough. "Look at this," I said, pointing to a line item. $12,000 withdrawn 3 days after the Denver reunion. Uncle David leaned in. "Denver only cost $8,000, total. I remember because Marcus showed me the receipts." We kept digging. More patterns emerged, transfers labeled coordination fee that matched no invoices, withdrawal amounts that towered over actual costs. The deeper we dug, the clearer the picture became. I grabbed my phone, photographing every page. Click, 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 backup. Copies in case these originals mysteriously disappeared. Yellow highlighter in hand, I marked each discrepancy, each questionable transfer. For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. But then reality crashed back in. Numbers alone weren't enough. Without context, without someone to verify these discrepancies, they were just figures on aging paper. "We need more," I said, pushing back from the table. "Someone who can explain what these numbers mean. Someone who was there when decisions were made." Uncle David nodded slowly. "Make a list. Start with who might know something." I grabbed a legal pad and wrote at the top, "Who can verify?" The list grew, but with each name came a question mark, a doubt. Finally, at the bottom of the page, I wrote one last line. "Who will stand beside me?" I stared at those words, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. The bank statements surrounding me held truth in their numbers, but numbers couldn't stand up in front of the family alone. They couldn't counter Aunt Lorraine's smooth explanations or match her years of carefully crafted influence. Dawn crept through my kitchen window as I spread everything across the table. Uncle David's statements on one side, my collection of old reunion materials on the other. The coffee maker gurgled in the background. I'd need plenty of fuel for this deep dive. You ever try matching 5 years of bank records against scattered documentation? Let me tell you, it's like solving a puzzle where half the pieces are missing and someone switched the box lid. I started with last year's reunion in Denver. The printed program listed 42 attendees, standard buffet dinner, open bar for 3 hours, and 2 nights at the Mountain View Hotel. I'd worked in event planning once, enough to know rough costs. Even with generous padding, that shouldn't have topped $8,000. The bank statement showed $12,000 withdrawn 3 days after. "That's $4,000 unaccounted for," I muttered, marking it with a red pen. My coffee had gone cold, but I barely noticed. The pattern repeated. Chicago reunion, 2021, $15,000 withdrawn against roughly $10,000 in documented expenses. Nashville 2020, similar story. Each discovery felt like another brick in a wall of evidence, but something nagged at me. I could hear Aunt Lorraine's dismissive laugh already. "Oh, honey, you don't understand how accounting works. There are so many hidden costs." She'd wave it away with that perfectly manicured hand, and the family would nod along. Numbers alone wouldn't be enough. I needed witnesses, people who'd handled the actual money. My phone became my lifeline as I worked through a list of relatives who'd managed check-in tables over the years. Cousin Sarah's voicemail, Uncle Pete's answering machine, Aunt Beth's leave a message. By noon, I had left enough messages to fill a forest of voicemail trees. The silence felt deliberate, like everyone was choosing sides without saying a word. Remember how Dad used to say documentation was everything? Well, he must have had help setting up that trust. Legal help, the kind that keeps copies. I found his old community group newsletter, buried in my email archives. They had a listserv, still active, thankfully. I composed a message trying to sound professional. Seeking attorney who handled Marcus Carver's estate planning, specifically regarding family trust establishment circa 2018. Urgent matter regarding trust execution. The hours ticked by. I reorganized my evidence piles, cleaned my desk. Twice. As the sun started its descent, painting my office wall orange, my email pinged. Miss Carver, I remember your father well. Harold Benton here. I drafted that trust, available to discuss via video call this evening if convenient. My heart jumped. Harold Benton. The name sparked a distant memory. Dad mentioning his detail-oriented attorney who always read the fine print twice. We set up a call for 8 p.m. I spent the next hour making my workspace camera ready, positioning my laptop so the desk looked organized but lived in. That sun-bleached reunion program, Dad's last one, I placed it carefully within frame. Silent testimony to what was at stake. Fresh coffee brewed. Hair smoothed. At 7:59, I clicked the video link and watched the connection wheel spin. Harold Benton's face filled my screen. Early 60s, neat beard, reading glasses perched on his nose. He had the kind of eyes that looked like they'd seen every trick in the legal book and wrote a few new chapters themselves. Ms. Carver, he said, leaning toward his camera. Tell me what's happening with your father's trust. His voice carried that perfect mix of authority and concern. Here was someone who might actually help me cut through Aunt Lorraine's web of excuses. Someone who knew exactly what that trust was meant to do. I took a deep breath, glancing at Dad's program beside my keyboard. Time to lay out everything we'd found. First, Harold said, adjusting his reading glasses. Let's go through what you have. I held up each document to my laptop camera, watching him lean in and squint. Bank statements, venue contracts, old emails. Everything Uncle David and I had gathered. After each one, Harold made a small sound that felt reassuring, like a doctor finding exactly the symptoms they expected. You know that feeling when you finally get to tell your side to someone who really understands? That's how it felt, watching Harold methodically dissect each piece of evidence. Now, he said, reaching off screen and returning with a thick folder. Let me show you the trust document itself. He held up a page marked with familiar handwriting, Dad's signature at the bottom. Your father was very specific about several things. Harold's finger traced down the page as he read. The purpose of this trust is to ensure equitable access to family gatherings for all descendants of Marcus Carver, regardless of economic status. That's section 1, paragraph 1. My throat tightened. Dad had put it in writing, right at the start. Section 3 details the administrative guidelines, Harold continued, flipping pages with practiced efficiency. The trustee, currently your aunt, is limited to a 5% administrative fee annually. All expenses must be documented with receipts, and an accounting must be available to any beneficiary upon request. I thought about Aunt Lorraine's dismissive laugh when I'd asked about costs. She's violated that last part already. Indeed, Harold set down the trust document. But there's more. The trustee must provide detailed budgets before each event and reconciliation reports after. Has she done either? No, I said, thinking of all those excessive withdrawals. Nothing. Then we have grounds for immediate action. Harold reached for a legal pad. I suggest filing a motion to freeze disbursements until proper accounting is produced. We'll do it quietly, under seal, to avoid unnecessary drama before the reunion. My heart picked up speed. Can we get it done before Florida? If we move quickly, he was already typing. I'll draft the motion tonight. Can you and your uncle have signed affidavits back to me by noon tomorrow? Absolutely. The word came out stronger than I expected. We spent the next hour crafting precise statements, Mine about the $1,500 ultimatum and denied records requests. Uncle David's about the suspicious withdrawals. Harold's paralegal sent over electronic signing links just as we wrapped up. Get some sleep, Harold advised before signing off. I'll file first thing tomorrow. I sat back in my chair, finally feeling like we had real momentum. The office was dark except for my screen's glow, and I realized I'd been hunched forward for hours. Just as I started to stretch, my email pinged. From Aunt Lorraine to family distribution list. Subject, exciting updates for our Florida reunion. My stomach dropped. The forced cheerfulness of those emojis felt like a warning. My dear family, the email began, dripping with sweetness. I need to share something concerning. It has come to my attention that someone among us is trying to tear our beautiful family apart with malicious interference in our reunion planning. I watched the read receipts start popping up instantly. Cousin Sarah, Uncle Pete, Aunt Beth. While I won't name names, the email continued, I want you all to be aware that false accusations are being made about our family finances. This person is attempting to create discord and distrust where there should only be love and anticipation for our gathering. More read receipts. Cousin Mike, Uncle John, the whole family tree lighting up in real time. I have always managed our reunions with complete transparency and dedication to bringing us together. Anyone suggesting otherwise is simply bitter about their own circumstances and trying to hurt us all. The final line twisted the knife. I trust you'll all know where your loyalties should lie. I sat there in the dark, watching names appear one by one in my inbox. Each read receipt felt like another person choosing sides, believing her story without question. The silence of my phone, no calls, no messages asking for my side, said everything. Dad's program still sat in the camera frame, its edges soft in the dim light. I touched the corner where his name was printed, remembering how he'd always said, truth needs patience more than speed. My email pinged again. Harold, confirming receipt of our signed affidavits. At least the wheels were in motion. While Aunt Lorraine played her public relations game, legal gears were turning quietly in the background. The motion would be filed under seal within hours. The morning after Aunt Lorraine's email blast felt like walking into an empty house where all the furniture had been rearranged in the dark. You know that feeling? When something's just off? My phone lay silent except for app notifications and spam. No calls from family asking for my side of things. No texts checking if I was okay. The group chat where we'd been planning reunion activities stayed frozen on Aunt Lorraine's last message about coordinating beach photos. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting to memories of past reunions. The way Dad would gather everyone for those silly three-legged races, his booming laugh carrying across the lawn. How he'd make sure to sit with different relatives at each meal, drawing out their stories like he was panning for gold. Around noon, the family group chat finally pinged. My heart jumped until I saw the message from Cousin Rachel. Please stop. That's all it said. 2 words that felt like a door slamming shut. I checked my messages again. The blue delivered tag under my earlier explanation to my favorite cousin Lisa hadn't changed to read. She'd always been the one I could count on to at least hear me out. The silence stretched like a rubber band ready to snap. Maybe this was the universe telling me to let it go. Peace might cost less than truth. Hadn't someone famous said something like that? My shoulders started to relax into resignation. I could still book my own flight to Florida, show up with a smile, pretend nothing had happened. The afternoon sun was painting long shadows across my living room when Harold called. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me pick up. Aaron? His voice had an odd edge to it. Are you able to stay on the line for a few minutes? I need to double-check something in your father's trust document. Sure, I said, hearing paper rustling in the background. The sound took me back to Dad's home office, where he'd spend hours organizing his files in those cream-colored folders. Harold's breathing changed rhythm, quicker, more focused. I knew there was something. Hold on. More rustling, a chair creaking, then suddenly, got it. The energy in his voice made me sit up straighter. There's a clause here. Your father buried it in Section 7, Paragraph 4. It requires complete financial transparency at any family event where trust funds are used. Not just general accounting, but detailed summaries of all transactions since the last gathering. And here's the key part. These must be produced upon request by any beneficiary during the event itself. The air in my living room felt different, like it does right before a thunderstorm breaks. I could almost sense Dad standing there, that slight smile he'd get when one of his careful plans clicked into place. You're saying, my voice came out barely, above a whisper. I'm saying that at the reunion, you have the legal right to demand full financial records on the spot. Your aunt can't delay or deflect. The trust explicitly requires immediate compliance. I pressed my palm against the desk to steady myself. Dad made sure. Marcus was thorough, Harold said softly. He built in safeguards we're only now uncovering. This clause gives us leverage we didn't have before. The room felt warmer, somehow, more solid. What do we do next? Let me handle the logistics. I'll book a flight to Florida and arrange for a process server to be on standby. We should meet tomorrow to go over the exact procedure and timing. I found myself nodding, then remembered he couldn't see me. Yes, whatever time works for you. I'll send you calendar options within the hour. He paused. Aaron? Your father would be proud of you standing up for his wishes. After we hung up, I walked over to where Dad's reunion program sat in its usual spot. The date for Florida was still circled in red on my calendar, but it no longer looked like a deadline. Now it felt more like a starting line. It's amazing what you can piece together when your back's against the wall. I had some airline miles scattered across 2 credit cards, not enough for a direct flight, but enough to matter. Uncle David knew a friend of a friend who worked reservations at the hotel, which meant access to the staff rate for his second room. And that brutal 6 a.m. connection through Charlotte? Let's just say I've had smoother travel days, but desperate times and all that. You know those moments when you're packing and everything feels surreal? That was me the night before we left, folding clothes into my carry-on while the local news droned in the background. Dad's old program sat on my nightstand, its edges soft from handling. I must have checked my documents folder 20 times. Every statement, every email, every piece of evidence tucked away like ammunition. 2 days early is cutting it close, Harold had warned during our final prep call. But between work constraints and ticket prices, it was the best we could do. He'd already coordinated with the court clerk about the pending freeze motion, and my inbox held his carefully worded demand letter citing Dad's transparency clause. The flight down was a blur of stale coffee and cramped seats. Uncle David met me at baggage claim, looking sharp despite the Florida humidity that hit us like a wall the moment we stepped outside. The taxi ride to the hotel felt like crossing into enemy territory, past palm trees and strip malls, my stomach doing flips that had nothing to do with motion sickness. I'll never forget that first breath of the lobby air, citrus and chlorine mixing with the artificial cool. Everything gleamed, marble floors, brass fixtures, enormous tropical arrangements that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. A world built for people who didn't check their account balance before buying groceries. Well, well, the voice cut through the ambient chatter like a knife through butter. What a surprise. And there she was, Aunt Lorraine, gliding across that marble floor like she owned it. Designer sundress, perfect manicure, that signature strand of pearls. Her smile was fixed in place, tight as lacquer, but her eyebrow arched up when she saw me. Clearly, she hadn't expected me to find a way around her $1,500 flight ultimatum. "Hello, Lorraine," Uncle David said, his tone carefully neutral. I noticed he'd dropped the aunt, a small rebellion, but it made me stand straighter. "David." She nodded, then turned that plastic smile my way. "Aaron, darling, I thought the travel costs were—" She let the sentence dangle like bait. "I managed," I said simply, feeling Dad's program in my tote bag like a compass pointing true north. "How resourceful." The words dripped condescension. Though I do hope you're not planning to cause any disruption. Family time is so precious. Uncle David cleared his throat. Actually, we should discuss tomorrow morning's agenda, when the rest of the family arrives. The main hall, 9 o'clock, she said, checking her phone, though I'm quite busy with preparations until then. We'll be there, I said. The words came out steady, practiced. I'd rehearsed this moment so many times in my head. She gave us another manufactured smile and clicked away across the marble, leaving behind a wake of expensive perfume. The rest of the day passed in a haze of unpacking and preparation. I laid out my clothes for the morning. Nothing flashy, just clean and professional. The kind of outfit Dad would have approved of. Uncle David and I ordered room service, reviewing our strategy one last time over club sandwiches. That night, lying in the unfamiliar hotel bed, I kept whispering my opening line into the darkness. I'm here to request the full financial records for the family legacy, trust, as required by Section 7, Paragraph 4. Simple, direct, just like Harold had coached. The words felt like river stones in my mouth, smooth from repetition, solid with purpose. Through the wall, I could hear the hum of the hotel's massive air conditioning system. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened and closed. In less than 12 hours, we'd be in that main hall, facing not just Aunt Lorraine, but the weight of years of manipulation and lies. I reached over and touched Dad's program on the nightstand, its familiar texture grounding me. Tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. The gulls woke me before my alarm, their cries mixing with the distant thud of set-up crews in the ballroom below. I lay there for a moment, letting the morning light filter through the curtains, thinking about how Dad used to say seabirds were nature's way of making sure no one slept through important moments. My phone buzzed. A text from Harold confirming he'd arrived and was having coffee in the lobby. Everything was set. The demand letter was printed, the court documents organized, and even my outfit, a simple navy blazer and slacks, felt like armor. You know that feeling when you're about to step onto a stage? When your stomach's doing backflips, but your mind is crystal clear? That was me, watching the relatives filter in through the ballroom's double doors. The space transformed hour by hour. Refreshment tables appeared draped in white linen. Twinkle lights spiraled up the columns, and poster-sized photos from past reunions created a timeline along one wall. I spotted familiar faces. Cousin Mike with his new beard, Aunt Susan wearing her signature purple, the twins from Seattle who'd grown impossibly tall. The sound level rose steadily, laughter and greetings bouncing off the high ceiling. Everyone looked so normal, like they had no idea they were about to witness a family earthquake. Ready? Uncle David appeared at my elbow, Harold beside him looking sharp in his suit despite the Florida heat. We positioned ourselves near the mic stand, which had been set up for the traditional welcome speeches. I checked my watch. 11:15. About 40 people now, exactly the audience we needed. I caught Aunt Lorraine watching us from across the room, her expression shifting from confusion to suspicion as she noted Harold's presence. "Excuse me, everyone?" I stepped up to the mic, my voice carrying clearly over the chatter. Heads turned, conversations paused. "I need a moment of your attention, please." You could feel the room's mood pivot, that subtle shift when people realize something unexpected is happening. I unfolded the demand letter, its crisp edges grounding me. As a beneficiary of the Family Legacy Trust established by Marcus Carver, I'm formally requesting full financial records as required by Section 7, Paragraph 4 of the trust document. My voice stayed steady, just like we'd practiced. This clause specifically requires transparency at family gatherings. Aunt Lorraine's perfect smile cracked at the edges. She moved toward the mic, but Harold stepped forward first, his presence adding weight to every word. "The clause is quite clear," he said, holding up the original trust document. "As the attorney who drafted it, I can confirm it requires immediate disclosure of all financial records when requested at a family event." This is grotesque. Aunt Lorraine's voice cut through the murmurs. "A stunt to spoil our gathering. The files aren't even at hand." "Actually," Harold interrupted, "smoothly, the trust explicitly states all administrative records must be present at reunion events. Furthermore, the court has received our motion to freeze disbursements pending review." The room went still. I could see my cousins' faces turning toward us like weather vanes catching a new wind. The twins whispered to each other. Aunt Susan's purple-clad shoulders stiffened. "We'll need to review these records before any toasts or celebrations." "Begin," I said, fighting to keep my tone neutral. "Dad wanted transparency. It's time we honored that." A collective intake of breath rippled through the room. Then, like some cosmic punchline, the hotel manager appeared pushing a cart. On it sat 3 sealed banker's boxes, each labeled in Dad's familiar handwriting. "Reunion Admin." Aunt Lorraine's face went slack. She'd forgotten about Dad's backup copies, the ones he'd stored with the hotel's management after the last reunion he attended. The ones marked, "Hold for next family gathering." The cart's wheels squeaked slightly on the polished floor, the sound impossibly loud in the shocked silence. "Thank you," I said to the manager, who nodded and stepped back. "Now, shall we begin?" We commandeered a side table near the windows, Harold methodically unpacking the boxes while Uncle David organized papers into neat stacks. The crowd pressed in around us, forming a tight semicircle. You could smell a mix of perfumes and aftershaves, feel the collective held breath. "Let's start with last year's reunion," I said, laying out 2 sets of documents side by side. "Here's the hotel invoice for the ballroom rental and catering, $2,800. I tapped the paper with my index finger, then slid over a bank statement. "And here's the withdrawal marked coordination fee for the same event, $9,400. A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Cousin Mike leaned in, squinting at the numbers. "That's standard for event coordination," Aunt Lorraine cut in, her voice carrying that familiar notes of honey tone she used when explaining things to children. "Industry rates, Section 3.2 of the Trust," Harold interrupted, holding up the document, "explicitly caps administrative fees at 15% of direct costs. This coordination fee is more than triple the actual expense." I moved to the next set of papers. February's mini reunion in Denver, 2 separate withdrawals for transportation, both $3,200. I spread out the corresponding month's documents. But there's no vendor receipt, no bus company, no shuttle service, nothing. "The paperwork must be misplaced," Aunt Lorraine said, but her voice had lost its sugar coating. "These events are complex." "Excuse me?" A young woman in a hotel uniform stepped forward. "I can confirm our ballroom rental rates. For gatherings of this size, including basic setup, we charge $2,200 to $3,000, depending on the season." Uncle David was already nodding. "Which matches perfectly with these vendor invoices." He gestured to a neat stack of hotel receipts. "But not with these withdrawals." He fanned out bank statements showing amounts 2 and 3 times higher. Harold's phone buzzed. He read the screen, then looked up with the calm satisfaction of a man who's just checkmated his opponent. "The court has granted provisional relief. Ms. Lorraine's access to the trust account is suspended, effective immediately, pending full forensic accounting." The room's atmosphere shifted like a weather front. I watched shoulders slump as realization spread through the crowd. The twins exchanged glances. Aunt Susan pressed her lips into a thin line. Someone in the back whispered, "I knew those costs seemed high." "Every reunion," I continued, my voice steady. "Dad wanted us together, no matter our circumstances. That's why he created this trust, so money would never keep us apart." I pulled out the last statement. Instead, these records show over $180,000 in unexplained withdrawals over 3 years. The whispers turned sharp, judgmental. "All those times she said it was too expensive. Remember when Janet couldn't come because of the fees? My kids missed last Christmas because of the required deposit." Aunt Lorraine's composure cracked. Her designer bracelets clattered against each other as she grabbed for her phone, her face draining of color. The screen's glow highlighted the panic in her eyes as she presumably read the court's notification. I met her gaze across the scattered papers. For a moment, I saw, past the perfect makeup and controlled facade, to something smaller and desperate. She'd counted on our silence, our unwillingness to question her authority. She'd never expected Dad's meticulous records to surface, or for his transparency clause to snap shut like a trap. "The trust will need a new administrator," Harold announced into the heavy silence. "Someone who understands its true purpose." Aunt Lorraine's phone slipped from her fingers, clattering on the table. The sound echoed through the ballroom like an ending. I stepped back to the microphone, my hands steady now. The murmurs in the room reminded me of waves hitting the shore outside, constant, gathering force. Looking across those familiar faces, some I'd known since childhood, others newer additions through marriages and growing families, I felt the weight of what needed to be said. "I know this is a lot to take in," began, "but there's a clear pattern here." I held up a timeline Uncle David had prepared. After every reunion for the past 3 years, large withdrawals appeared, always thousands more than the actual costs. Christmas 2021, $1,200 withdrawn. Venue cost was $4,200. Easter 2022, $15,600 taken out. Total expenses were $5,800. I paused, letting the numbers sink in. Summer reunion that same year, $18,900 versus $7,300 in real costs. The USIT whispers grew louder. I caught fragments. "No wonder the fees kept climbing, and that's why Tom couldn't bring his kids last time. I want to thank the hotel staff for their help in confirming the actual costs," I continued, "and thank you all for listening. This isn't easy for anyone, but Dad's trust was meant to bring us together, not—" "You're twisting everything," Aunt Lorraine cut in, her voice sharp but wavering. "These numbers, you don't understand the complexity of—" "Then why weren't there ever any scholarship flights?" Cousin Rachel stood up near the back, her arms crossed. "You told my sister she couldn't come last Christmas because airfare was too expensive. If the trust was meant to cover travel costs—" Aunt Lorraine's mouth opened, then closed. The silence felt heavier than any answer she could have given. Harold stepped forward, his manner professional but kind. "Given these discrepancies, the trust requires new oversight. A neutral trustee must be appointed to ensure proper management and transparency going forward. The focus," I added, "needs to return to Dad's original purpose, making sure every family member can attend, regardless of their circumstances." Uncle David's hand landed warm and solid on my shoulder. "I'd like to nominate Aaron as interim trustee," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the room. "With Harold providing professional oversight and auditing, of course." More voices joined in agreement. I saw heads nodding, felt the shift in the room's energy from shock to resolution. Aunt Lorraine's composure finally shattered completely. She snatched up her designer clutch, the clasp clicking shut like a door being locked. As she moved toward the exit, relatives stepped aside, creating a path nobody wanted to block. Her heels clicked. Against the marble floor, sharp, angry sounds that couldn't quite mask what I heard catching in her throat. Part of me wanted to follow her, to see her reaction, to witness the full impact of her exposure. I even took a few steps toward the terrace doors where she'd disappeared. But then I stopped. Dad had always said that sometimes silence speaks louder than any words we could choose. Instead, I turned back toward the ballroom windows. Afternoon sunlight streamed in, laying a bright line across the stack of reunion programs on the registration table. They were Dad's design, barely changed over the years, simple, welcoming, with space for everyone's name. In that moment, they looked less like papers and more like blank pages waiting for our next chapter. Uncle David appeared at my elbow. "You okay?" "You know what?" I said, straightening my shoulders. "For the first time in a long while, I really am." The room had begun to settle into small clusters of conversation, the kind of natural gathering that reunions were meant to encourage. Harold was already setting up a small workspace in the corner, his laptop open and ready to begin the process of restructuring the trust's oversight. I picked up one of the programs, feeling its familiar weight. The sun through the windows warmed my face as I watched my family start to come together again, this time without the shadow of secrets between us. I moved toward the registration table where sunlight pooled across the scattered programs, warming the paper like memories coming alive. "Could everyone gather round for a moment?" I called out, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "We need to discuss some immediate changes." The family drifted over, their faces open and attentive, so different from the guarded looks I'd gotten used to these past few years. You know that feeling when a room finally exhales? That's what it felt like. "First things first," I said, spreading out some papers Harold had prepared. "We're implementing immediate travel reimbursements for everyone here. The trust has more than enough funds to cover your flights and hotel costs, just like Dad intended." Cousin Rachel's eyes widened. "Even retroactively?" "Especially retroactively," I nodded. "Harold's already drafting the paperwork for anyone who had to skip previous reunions due to travel costs. We'll need your receipts, but we'll make it right." Uncle David stepped up beside me. "And going forward? Quarterly reports," I stated firmly. "Published where everyone can see them. Every expense, every decision, transparent as glass. And here's the big change. Starting now, flight stipends get funded before invitations even go out. No more asking anyone to front costs they can't afford." Harold's laptop keys clicked softly as he worked. "I'm submitting the trustee transition paperwork now," he said. "The court order is clear. Aunt Lorraine's access to the account is permanently suspended. The family's confidence in her management is—" He paused, diplomatic even now. Similarly concluded. "Let's be direct about this," I added, because Dad always valued straight talk. "Aunt Lorraine lost control 2 ways today, legally, through the court order and—" I glanced at the faces around me, saw the understanding there. Through breaking the trust this family placed in her. The weight of it settled over us. Someone, I think it was Uncle David's wife, squeezed my hand. "I need some air," I said after a moment. "Harold can walk you through the reimbursement forms." I stepped out onto the terrace, the Florida air thick with salt and possibility. The sun-bleached reunion program I'd brought from home was still in my bag, and I pulled it out, feeling its soft, worn edges. How many times had Dad handled this same design, tweaking it year after year to make sure it said, "Welcome" to everyone who held it? The ocean breeze ruffled the paper's corner. I could picture future reunions so clearly. Open invitations sent without strings attached. Expense, reports posted right next to the photo albums. Travel stipends flowing exactly as Dad had planned. No more gates, no more judgment, just family. I ran my thumb along the program's edge, feeling where it had softened over time. It was like touching a thread that ran straight from Dad's desk to this moment, connecting everything he'd believed in to everything we could be now. "Integrity always outlasts greed," I whispered, and felt the truth of it settle into my bones like sunshine soaking into paper.